But this is Harvey Newman and Andrea Young, and we are here this morning with Bill Ide, and we're here to talk about the making of modern Atlanta and some of the memories that you have of participating in that process. And so
yeah, and one of the things we're starting with everybody is sort of why Atlanta, how you came to start your career here.
Well, it's interesting because I lived in South Carolina and I was going to Virginia Law School, and I was trying to decide what to do when I got out of law school, and I'd worked in New York at a prestigious firm called Davis Polk, and they'd asked me to come back when I got out, and I sort of felt like I wanted another experience before then, and so I had lined up a Fulbright or one of the scholarships, and then a dear friend of mine named Phil Heiner and I were talking, and I said, "What are you doing when you got out of law school?" And he said, "I'm going to go down to Atlanta and clerk in the Fifth Circuit for Elbert Tuttle." And he started telling me about why he was excited about that. And so I thought, well, this would be an interesting experience. So I literally went to what they call Fed Second, which is a list of the judges. And I said, "Who else is there other than Elbert Tuttle?" And the other one that was listed was Griffin Bell. So I came down and interviewed him, and I liked his energy, and I just Atlanta was a small city then, and I just thought this would be a comfortable place, and I thought I'd come for here for a year and go back to New York. But then when I hit here, it was during the heyday of civil rights, and it was really when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had all of the major civil rights cases in front of it. So that 1 year was just an incredible experience, because we would have, the focus of the nation in a lot of ways on, school systems, police departments, literally dealing with every aspect of organized society in the South on integration, and with the courts, the Fifth Circuit taking the lead on that. A lot of controversy, people coming from New York and other places, civil rights activists, and I was just fascinated with those dynamics, and had that very sheltered life, grown in a segregated society, and thought that's the way it was. And then I watched, I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. And then people, a lot of civil rights, that energy that came in to deal with the legal system and to deal with going out and organizing, sort of also just permeated Atlanta. So it there was a lot of activism. This was right after JFK, Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society, and there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. So I became very intrigued and thought, well, this is a good place to stay. I like the Southern style of people, and what amazed me was the far right. There were some terrible extremists, but in general, even people that were opposed to change had a civility about them in general. And that's what fascinated me, was how the society conformed to really what the courts and then Congress said. So it was just the most idealistic time in my life in action, and so that I decided I would stay, and I went to King and Spalding, and that's when I met Andrew Young. So I met Carl Ware. Carl Ware represented the Atlanta Housing Authority, and he was an intern sitting in the back of the room from Carnegie Mellon, and we became friends. And I got I'd always lived in little towns, but I just got captivated by the spirit that was here, because it was just. And I miss it. I wish we had that spirit today, because it was so energetic, and this was everyone was pulling together, and we would travel around the South. We would go to courts where it'd be held in Mississippi and Louisiana. So I'd say in 1 year, and I was an American history major. In 1 year, I saw more history in the making, and I just I got very excited, and so that's. I came here because of a happenstance, and then I stayed here because a tremendous amount of energy, excitement, dreaming. It was, Atlanta's the city of dreams. I always tell people, you know, the dream. You know, they dreamed the phoenix out of the ashes after the Civil War, and then the civil rights is the dream, and then we got a lot of mini dreams. MARTA, which I spent a lot of time on, was a great galvanizer of dreams. That was going to put us on the map, and so that's another whole experience. It was just fantastic. Ultimately, the Olympics, and so. It was a great decision, which was not made with a lot of thought up front, but it came out very nicely for me.
So tell us about how you met Andy Young.
I met, you know, and I had no. When I went to law school, I was, you know, I was just so green, and so these people that had been in the service were older than me, and they were so mature and sophisticated, and I thought, wow. And so when I came here, I really didn't have a background of, I was exploring. Thank you, Mark, and just learning, and so so I learned a lot from the Fifth Circuit. That you know, and I felt strongly about the fundamental fairness of civil rights. But I didn't know issues like Vietnam, and so here was this man named Andrew Young, and I watched, you know, the civil rights people interest me, Dr. King and Andrew Young, because they had led a very successful movement, and then they kept on going, and they turned into other issues that were social justice issues in their minds that were new to me, and I didn't really understand. So. Foy Devine introduced me to, we went to dinner with Andy and your mother, and had a wonderful time, and I thought he was so interesting. And he told me, you know, he wanted to run for Congress. And I said, oh, I'll help you, which there weren't many white lawyers my age, or any age, helping him. But I thought, I thought he was a dreamer. I thought he was an idealist. I thought he was going to make good things happen, and I didn't think he'd win. But I wanted to see him run. So that's how we became friends. And then he's got a great sense of humor, and he's always picking on me. And we play a little tennis, and we became social friends, which is everyone becomes a social friend. Andy Young. And that's how I got to know him, and then the way I got to know Carl. Also aware was he wanted to get in politics, so I was his treasurer when he ran for city council. So I got involved with politics as a volunteer, and I also got very interested in legal services for the poor, and that sort of tied in with, you know, you would meet you'd meet labor, you'd meet civil rights, you'd meet these networks, and which were fun. A lot of young people. Atlanta had a big middle of the road, you know, sort of conservative by their history, who were civil and accommodating, and then they had this energetic smaller group that was really pushing. So I had my day job being the traditional lawyer, but then I would volunteer a lot. And those kinds of things, and you know, one thing led to the other, because then the Carter movement started, and that was a big, exciting thing, and a lot of us got involved with that. And first as governor, quite honestly, because that was a huge shift, and that was the other aspect. You learned you had to go to up on the hill to the Capitol to get things done for the city, and very conservative, but amenable on constructive things. So. You know, back then we weren't. There was a whole spirit of getting things done. We didn't have all this dogma that you have today. It's interesting. There were a few. I mean, I went with the Fifth Circuit. We went over to. They had if I go too far afield, tell me. But what had happened was NAACP was in Hancock County, which is what is the little town? I can't remember, but. And the school was, then they were trying to integrate the school, and so the NAACP came down to the courthouse to do their demonstration, and this itinerant minister starts reading into the Bible on a megaphone, and the sheriff arrests everybody for disturbing the divine worship there's a statute that says you can't be within a church. And so they threw them all in jail. And of course, immediately Howard Moore, the civil rights attorney, and Donald Hollowell filed suit. And we went over to Augusta and heard that. And my eyes got bigger than saucers, because there's a lawyer named Charlie Block, a very famous lawyer from Macon way back then, who was arguing to the court that Plessy versus Ferguson, which said separate but equals Constitution, was still good law, even though Brown versus Board of Education had already been passed. And Judge Scarlett from Savannah, an avowed segregation federal judge, said, "That's right, Charlie, that's right." And Judge Bell was just mortified. And so you just saw a lot. You saw a lot. But even then, no one was going to throw bombs at each other. It was even then, when it was just ridiculous, it was within a spirit of we'll all work together. It was very, very, very interesting. You know, the only times I really ever seen violence in Atlanta, and I really worried when Dr. King's death occurred, was the garbage strike, I guess, we had at one time, and then the Rodney King thing, which a bunch of thugs really caused more than. So anyway, I've gone a little far afield on you.
No,
Excuse me.
Any other cases that stand out from that era with Judge Bell?
Well, an interesting thing about Judge Bell, he was more of an executive than judicial, you know, guy, and he was head of the Crime Commission while he was also a federal judge. So they'd all come over and meet, and this was a big community spirit back then. And so I would see their meetings, and I would just see the amount of volunteer time that you know, business people and professionals were doing, you know, and it was Mills Lane kind of spirit. And then Mike Trotter and some others formed what was the informal network of where black leaders and white leaders met.
Action Forum.
Yeah, the Action Forum. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I'm dating myself, but
No, we just had a long interview with Mike Trotter.
yeah. Well, the Action Forum was really important because because that was just a great venue, and things got done. And well, too many thoughts are coming at the same time. I was thinking about Maynard when he started. You know, Maynard was the rebel, and
go with that.
And Marvin. Well, I'm sort of headed into MARTA, because what happened for me is I did the federal judiciary clerking, got very inspired. Then I went to King and Spalding, volunteered a lot of time. Then I made the decision, which was a big risk on my part, to go support the MARTA referendum. And there was a little law firm called Huey and Harlan that represented what was then a planning agency, but if a sales tax passed, you know, then it would become full-fledged. So I went over there and became the lawyer for that with Stell Huey, and so then I saw a lot of the community. So MARTA represented the community was constantly looking for things to make it grow and make it a major force of prosperity. You know, and it's interesting. You can see all those little steps that ultimately led to each of which was valuable. The airport, MARTA, which ultimately led to the Olympics, which ultimately led to here we are today. But it was always that spirit of people working together. So MARTA, I went out and literally was in the campaign, even though I was a lawyer, and Jesse Hill was just a major player there, because Jesse was on the MARTA board. And so I watched with just amazement. There was a meeting out at the Hilton Hotel at the airport, and one of my first meetings, and Lyndon Wade was the secretary, but Jesse, I think, was the only black board member, and it was about where was the line going to go. And so you have this tension. If this is for the good for the community, this MARTA, well, how do I know all elements of the community is served? So there was a big issue about what the fare was going to be. Leroy Johnson was, in his infamous style, some people went to meet with him at Pascal's. And he said, "Gentlemen, this is just like the quiz program. Let's make a deal." And that was Leroy. And the fare's got to be 15 cents, because if you're going to do a regressive sales tax, then you know, you've got to help the people. And so, but it was that kind of thinking and that kind of, and which is consistent with the Action Forum, where people would sit down and cut deals. I got my constituency, you got your constituency. And so I watched Jesse about, well, where should the line go as far as Proctor? Was it Proctor Creek, I guess? Because that was the black community needed to show that the line was serving all of the community. And it was a real education to, I got to know Jesse well, and then Herman well, and many others, but you just saw people working together. Then I watched Maynard come along, because he and I got to know each other, because when I did legal services, he was out at Emory as a legal services lawyer. And he wanted to jump ahead of the class, and so he was a little more impatient and a little bit more Maynard. And he's a dear friend, and I love him. But that was another element. You know, we sort of rocking boats and just wandering around about how all that worked. We were at a public meeting once, and there was a gentleman named Marta. The chairman of the board was a man named Roy Blunt, who was from Decatur, and old traditional Southerner. And Marvin Arrington came, and I guess Marvin was on the city council then. And he really got pretty much in the face of, he said, "I'm a New Day black, you know, you got to da-da-da-da-da." And Jesse Hill said, "Mr. Arrington," and he dressed him down like a school child right there in front of the whole meeting. It was fascinating to watch. He said, "When are you going to learn about civility?" And he said, "You know, you treat Mr. Blunt." So I watched all this, and it was fascinating. And you know, I think everybody liked everybody, even when they didn't agree with everybody. And so the way I view it. Roy Blunt was an interesting guy. Marta had a election, and this was my whole legal career, whether or not that was going to pass. DeKalb County cast 110,000 votes. It passed. It was announced on television that it passed by 461 votes out of 110,000. So there was immediate recount. And Morton Rolston was on the other side. Morton had one agenda, and that was to move the line off of Peachtree down one over, so it would go in front of the Heart of Atlanta, which he owned. It was all be said and done. That's what was going on. And Everett Milliken was opposed to it, and he'd worked for Gulf Oil, so there was a lot of suspicion whether or not the asphalt people and the highway people were opposed to this. Henry Dodson was opposed. He said the 15-cent fare was a trick. And I sort of viewed that as Henry further than Henry, you know, his. So there was all this swirling around of within the community about this vote, and so I mean it was a very narrow passage, and I argued they brought a judge down from Cartersville named Jefferson Davis of all things, and the governor's office was. They had to make the appointment, and you know, and he was a good, fair man, Southern as can be. So we're in there, and I'm arguing, and which is true. The case law was you don't recount unless there's fraud. And he said to me, he said, "Son," because I was 31. He said, "I'm going to rule you're going to recount the votes. You can appeal to the Supreme Court, but if we don't recount these votes, this community will never come back together because they'll always think that there was a trick or there was a." And he said, "And you got 5 minutes, you got 10 minutes, you can call your client, you got 10 minutes, tell me what you want to do." So I called up Mr. Blunt, and I said, "You know, here's what's happened." He said, "Well, what do you think we ought to do?" And I, again, my client's on the line. I said, "We need to recount them, because we've got to get the community back pulling together." So we recounted them, and these are paper ballots, and it was unbelievable. And we gained 10, so we won by 471. But that sort of put that behind. It was the judge was very smart, and it was courageous at Roy Blunt. It was his call, but I think that was so important because otherwise it would have lingered in the community. And to me, because the airport had already happened, so we had that major decision. But to me, it was the airport. It was this driving civic. We're a city on the go. Mills Lane, the Action Forum. It was the civil rights. Atlanta, look at Bull Connor, and then look at Montgomery, Birmingham, and then look at here. Atlanta, black, white leadership pulling together through that, and then and that was sort of what's next, So then it was MARTA, and then it was a lot of efforts like Legal Services for the Poor, which we got money into Atlanta Legal Aid. We got money created Georgia Legal Services, which is a statewide. So it was a lot of fun, interesting things. Then it was Jimmy Carter, and then Andy Young as mayor. I'll tell you a funny story about Andy Young. 1976, we had a meeting. I was head of the American Bar of Young Lawyers, and I invited the ambassador to, would he come give a speech, be on the panel to give a speech. He said he would. No surprise, he came in late to the program. He comes up next to me, 1,000 things going on in his life. He says, "What's this program on?" And I said, "Justice." He goes to the podium, and when it's his turn, he says, "I understand I'm here to talk to you about justice, but in civil rights, we never got beyond asking for mercy." So the whole room just cracked up. But he was the best extemporaneous speaker I've ever seen. One time in South Africa, he and I traveled, these are years later, went for Monsanto to talk about agriculture and GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And we went to this place that Monsanto had set up an experimental ag station. He didn't know where we were going, but we agreed to go down there. It was a place in the apartheid history where there had been a group that had protested, and they'd all been arrested. So it was a very famous place. He knew it like that, and he got up and gave the most beautiful remarks commemorating that spirit and that history. So
was that Rivonia, Sharpeville?
In South Africa, might be the first. It wasn't Sharpeville.
Okay.
And we were in Jayburg, and we drove about 2 hours south. So anyway, that was I've sort of gone over the map on you. So
well, say some more about MARTA and Jesse Hill. We don't have Jesse. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to interview. He's not well at all. Mm-hmm. And so we are really happy to hear any good Jesse Hill stories, because I think he's one of those people always moving behind the scenes. Did you get calls at 5 a.m. when you were working on MARTA?
Well, and when you and I go down to, my role at MARTA was sort of, we hired in Alan Keeper to run it, and Alan was a really good administrator. He was not a good politician, dealing with people. So I sort of ended up being a lot of the interface with board members and with community people. So when and Jesse had that tremendous amount of energy, and so I would go down to Atlanta Life and meet with him. And what fascinated me, this is a bizarre thing to say, but that he was so full of just energy and so coiled. Literally, his stomach, as he talked, his stomach would move. He was so kinetic. His whole body was moving around, and he'd da-da-da-da-da-da. But he had the great knack of standing up for a proposition that most people, which would be unpopular and uncomfortable to a lot of the white community, but he would do it in a style that they were very comfortable with. So he always was like this dressing down Marvin Arrington thing. He was big on civility. He was big on mutual respect, but he didn't hedge his words as far as the points he wanted to make and the things he thought he needed to get accomplished. And he was a master of getting ahead of things and positioning. So he would see the issues coming before a lot of other people would. And he'd sort of have people positioned. By the time the issues came up, they were pretty well there where he wanted them. So he would call me a lot and say, "Well, we need to do this, we need to do that." And he never was perceived as having any self-interest in it, which is huge. And I don't know how. I didn't see as much. I saw him interfacing with MARTA, and I saw him interfacing in the community. I don't know how he dealt with all the things he had to deal with, whether it's Maynard or whether it was Billy McKinney or Henry Dotson or whoever else he would have to deal with. And he and Herman was not on the MARTA board, but they certainly were the Batman and Robin. I don't know who was who, and they were a great combination because Jesse was the one going 100 miles an hour, and then Herman was sort of we need to do that, we need to do this, right? But he was a tremendous networker. He was a tremendous. He just outthought and outworked most other folks, and not in a bad way, but for the agenda he thought ought to be carried out. So a lot of the issues came up at MARTA, affirmative action, employment, things like which neighborhood you go in first, and so it was interesting because you got a community and say, okay, I'm going to spend $1.5 million and create a whole new thing in this community. It raises every kind of issue you could ever imagine. I mean, just one, people want that money, give me a job. Two, it's if it goes right in front of my store, I make a lot more money, so where is it going to go? Three, the relocation, you can kick me out in a minute. And then the Historic Preservation Act aspect, the environmental aspect. This was the time when the highway, the big battle environmentally was going on.
Great Park.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, all this sort of, it was like a resetting the chairs. And so those are the kind of issues he was involved with us. And so if he called you, you knew that something was up. I mean, okay, what are we doing today? But I never, that I can recall, I never really saw anyone. I just didn't see, isn't that interesting? I really didn't see much acrimony in all of this, which is sort of, I mean, we had violence out in the country, and we had bigots and racists, but not in the Atlanta interaction, getting in the power center, if you will. And Jesse was in the power center, and Maynard was so young that he was very awkward at first, and so he may have had to do that to shake the boats on affirmative action, the airport, and all that. And maybe Jesse probably could have got the same thing done in a much smoother style, but Jesse was older and he just knew how to manage people better. And because the key of all of this was the business community seeing the bigger, people getting them to see the bigger picture of the full community has to be involved, supported, and be a part of this movement forward, or it's not going to work. And that's what Atlanta did so well. I couldn't tell you today what the business community is, because in the old days I could tell you. It was real easy. It was the banks, and it was the contractors, and it was because it was smaller. Mm-hmm. And the people that wanted growth tended to be the ones that were on the boards and spent the time on it, the bankers, Alan Hardin and construction people. And of course, we were not nearly diverse back then as we are today.
In the economy or the...
our different ethnic groups, and exactly, which your dad had a lot to do. I mean, when he was mayor, I mean, he just opened up whole new windows of. I remember going down and Shirley, to talk about something about the city, and Shirley be on the phone with Andy, and Andy was in Africa, but he really took us. All this happens in stages, and if we didn't get civil rights right, we'd been in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. If we didn't get MARTA right, that would have been a symbol we can't do growth things or big things. I'm sure some would argue bringing the Braves down, that was before my time. If Jimmy Carter hadn't succeeded, if we'd had, I'm sounding political, but if we'd had Perdue as our governor back then, and no government doesn't do anything, shrink everything, we wouldn't have been grown. We wouldn't have been attractive.
What do you think what Carter did as governor meant for Atlanta?
Well, it was really interesting. It was he galvanized, the Jesse Hills and Andrew Youngs galvanized do the right thing on civil rights, and there's a lot of excitement and a lot of people got behind that. Carter got a lot of excitement behind him about the South the new South should emerge. And so, let's get health care right, let's get environment right. And there was tremendous excitement about that. And he was very progressive. It was, the South at that time was blessed with, all of a sudden they had a series of progressive governors that, South Carolina, McNair, West, Jimmy Carter sort of symbolized that shift. And I'm dating myself. Who was governor before Carter? Because we had on like Marta, Dick Russell, Senator Russell was still there. He cooperated. It's interesting, he cooperated. Whoever was governor definitely cooperated. It's a shame on me.
Sanders.
Probably, but you got Sanders and Maddox.
It was Maddox.
And
Maddox?
I should know that too. And
because they had, it was Maddox. Because one of the stories is that he helped because Atlanta had permission to have the referendum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. And because when we did legal services, Maddox was the governor. Mm-hmm. But Sanders sort of ran the Maddox regime. The people in that you dealt with.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he had a lot of his people in there. Mm. Maddox, he wasn't a hands-on governor. He was riding his bicycle backwards in Georgia Tech, and Sanders was a progressive. Mm-hmm. I should give him due credit. But the energy was just a different energy than when, because we're sort of taking that JFK, that OEO had been set up under Lyndon Johnson. So there's a lot of federal money that brought federal people, that brought this. OEO had a big, what I'm talking about, Office of Economic Opportunity. Yeah, it gave a lot of technical assistance, like for us to set up legal services, and so it, like there was a guy named Dan Bradley who's no longer living that worked for OEO, and he was in Atlanta, and he was part of this liberal movement, and he had a big influence on me of setting up the legal services program. So there were just all these influences.
Talk a little bit about the legal services. Were those decentralized into the neighborhood in EOA sites, or was it concentrated in a?
Well, the way it started was, and the Germans during in the 1800s started the notion of we need lawyers for people that don't have money to let them function in society. And up till the 60s, it was always if the community would spend some money on it, that's how you had it. So we had Atlanta Legal Aid, but it wasn't very well funded, so it was not that impactful. When OEO got involved and they started putting money out, the federal grants, there's a guy named Michael Padnos that was from Boston, who was a piece of work. He ran against Herman Talmadge, of all things. What? No, that's not right, because Maynard ran against Herman Talmadge. But anyway, Michael ran for the Georgia legislature. But so he got the money, and then we started putting offices into the lower socioeconomic areas, Vine City, etc. But that was only in Atlanta. Then we created a separate one, which I chaired, called the Georgia Legal Services Program, and that was, statewide. And so the idea was, yes, to and see all this. I'd forgotten about this, but what's my area where the stadium is now? Over here.
Summerhill.
No, it's right where the Civics, not stadium, the Civics is. Is it Buttermilk Bottom?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was all See, when I started with Atlanta Housing Authority, that was my first legal assignment, we were condemning right over here. And then the Bedford Pine, see, one of the things OEO did, they organized the citizens. So, and I think maybe Joe Martin was in the middle of that. So the Bedford Pine people were raising hell with the housing authority, rightfully so. Where are you going to relocate people? You know, you're taking people out of these jobs. And Georgia Tech was expanding like mad, and we were condemning over there. And then they needed lawyers, and so the legal services, Atlanta Legal Aid would give them the lawyers. And they were really activists. And there was a backlash against that, and then they tried to pass legislation that, you know, lawyers can't represent, legal aid lawyers can't represent groups, you can't sue the state. So there was this tension going on. I can give you an example. The first legal services statewide program we formed, a guy named Jim Parham was over at Department of Human Resources, a really good guy. So he found some HEW money, gave it to us. The legislature didn't know what they were doing, and so they let him do it. And it was called, but they insisted that the word indigent go in there, so it was Georgia Indigent Legal Services. And that's how we started out. And then we sued, I was chairman of the board of that, and then we sued a governmental agency and some merchants, and they all went to the legislature, complained, and they defunded us. And so economic interests were a part of all this too. It was sort of interesting. And then we went and got federal money, and they couldn't touch us. And so they were all in the bar. Was some of us in the bar were really pushing hard, and other people in the bar were very conservative, and you know, why should poor people need lawyers? And so there was a whole education thing going on that the civil rights people kept moving forward and trying to educate us. And so when I started this, the majority of the bar was opposed to legal service to the poor. Today, I'd say by far the majority of the bar is in favor of it. So we've made a lot of progress on a lot of fronts, whether it's, you know, in legal services or MARTA or civil rights. I mean, there's a lot of issues still to be done. There's no question about that. But so anyway, so Jimmy Carter was the springboard of sort of this new idealism, and you know, and he got the Chattahoochee done finally, where he protected that land, and so he was very courageous. Jack Watson, he put in charge of the healthcare system to reform it
In Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
What'd they do?
Well, Jack was, what was Jack? Jack was chairman of the board of DHR, whatever had health care. And Jack was out there early on methadone and on drugs. And so I can't tell you exactly, you know, but I know one thing they did is they consolidated, because they had all these little pieces dealing with health care for the poor. And Carter did a lot of consolidation of government, which was good.
Yeah, he created the Department of Human Resources, pushing everything together.
Great. Yeah.
Under one umbrella, and that's now being
Done.
undone.
Sad to hear. And well, and then, you know, in Atlanta went through this is, you know, we went through this excitement. We went through the growth era, and then we hit the Reagan era, and then all of a sudden, you know, the federal dynamic shifted, and cynicism about can government solve things sort of shifted. So we've been through the yo-yo of up and down throughout all these years. But I still think there's a spirit here that's pretty remarkable. So, you know, when the reason that Andy was more successful than Maynard would shoot me for saying this, you know, I would say Maynard, I give Maynard a lot of credit, and I was one of his key supporters and would if he ran again. But he took the role of I'll be the first one over the fence to take all the arrows when he came in as mayor, and that may have been the only way to do that. But he lost the business community, and he pulled the business community back. And then the Maynard the second time, you know, really worked on the business community. And I remember Maynard saying, he said, this is so much harder than the first time because you didn't have the federal money that you had the first time, and you didn't have a small business community. You know who you were dealing with. You know, it got more diffuse. But then I'd say the Olympics just then jumps out as another great example, because I mean, Billy Payne's first job was working for me as a lawyer.
Oh, is that right?
And then he went on to greater glory. But when he started that, he wouldn't have gotten anywhere without Andy. Legitimacy within the state, and then ultimately getting the votes abroad. But that was so interesting to watch, because it was that same kind of spirit. I mean, you know, you had Charlie Battle or Bobby Reardon, or whoever you want to name, out of their, Horace Sibley, out of their pockets, flying all over the world. And later, after we got it, a friend of mine in Sydney came, named Rod McGeoch, and he said, I'm gonna be the Billy Payne of Australia. How do you get the Olympics? And so he went and saw Billy and Charlie Battle and Andy, and the answer is, you become personal friends with all the players and create that rapport, and that's what's always happened. That there's always been, you may disagree with me, but you know me and we respect each other, and that's, I think, the civility point is a huge point throughout all of this. And then I'm jumping on you, but then so Andy goes out as mayor, Maynard comes in as mayor. Billy says, I got the Olympics. And Maynard said, "What? I'm the mayor. What are we going to do about this?" And so we formed because technically it was the city's call, and so we formed a little group that I suggested to Maynard he do, of citizens to evaluate the Olympics and whether or not to take it. And Radicek was on there, and Clay Long was our lawyer, and I was on there, Dave Garrett was on there. I can't remember who else. And it was really, I'll never forget Radicek saying, okay, you got the multiplier effect, here's the investment, multiply by Donna, but the thing that will be huge is the recognition in the world of who Atlanta is and what it is, because people think New York, they think Chicago, and I really believe that's true. I think that's been incredible, how it put us on the map. So that's just one more example of this, how people work together, think huge, and then leap out there.
So when the Olympics was awarded, there was then a discussion of whether to take it.
Oh, it's a big political thing. Oh yeah, it's it's because it's because the Olympics is wacko. Oh, excuse me, don't put that on the record. But it's they formed a not-for-profit Atlanta Committee to organize the games to go pursue it, and you had the governor saying great, the mayor great, but technically when they quote awarded you the games, you had to enter into a contract. And that's when, it was a dream, and nobody thought what the reality was. So Maynard walked in, what's the reality? What's the state do? What do I do? What if this thing goes south and it costs an extra $1 billion? Who's going to pay for it? So that had never been dealt with. So that's what he inherited. So there was about a 6-month standoff, and all this mashing, and Billy was furious, and, frustrated. And, but it all worked out. But see, the state created an oversight. By the way, the state created an oversight agency over MARTA too. It's because they have the ultimate power. So, it was. I think it was quiet. I don't think many people saw the tensions, but they were there. And I think Maynard had to go through some diligence, because you look at Montreal, which almost bankrupt the city. Right. He didn't know how it was going to work. Right. Worked out great. Right. And then I ultimately became the lawyer for the United States Olympics Committee. That's why I say it's wacko, because I spent another 4 years learning the Olympic movement, and it is. And they were afterwards. It was really interesting, because I was in the IOC was. They didn't like Atlanta, because Atlanta out snookered them. Atlanta out negotiated them. So they sort of said, we'll never let Atlanta happen again. And but that's a group of elites, and I think it's a great compliment to Atlanta that they were frustrated with us, because it was really on self-interest, and it wasn't on we didn't do a good games.
So is that why Juan Samaranch wouldn't say these were the greatest games?
Exactly. Exactly. It's all behind the scenes stuff. I mean, he he got the Spanish government, you know, to build a new airport for Barcelona, where he's from. They built a new airport. They built a ring road. They knocked down all the seedy stuff on the waterfront and rebuilt that. So his whole mindset is very imperial, and so I am IOC, and you're getting a great favor, Atlanta. So what are you going to do for me? And you know, AD and Billy, I mean, a good businessman. So they just mainly on the TV rights. They just outmaneuvered and cut a better deal
On the TV rights.
Well, that's where the big money
Yeah.
comes in. Yeah, I mean, I'm coming real, you know, at 10,000
Right.
feet, but I pretty well remember that. So I think after that, they probably negotiated better deals for them on the organizing. So I think his failure to say we were the greatest games had a lot to do with there was a tension always with us, which if you didn't have tension with them, you were in trouble, because they're very imperialistic, and a fair amount of see, when I was chairman of the United States Olympic Committee, we had to deal with Salt Lake. They had corruption. It's the IOC. I'm amazed that our people did so well, because there's a fair amount of corruption at certain levels at the IOC. Corruption being, my son needs to go to school, mine needs a doctor. You know, it's favors beyond, you know, disproportionate to buy votes, and so we did a great job getting through that and negotiating a good deal.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I remember when they were investigating Salt Lake, they came then and revisited Atlanta.
Because I mean, I was at a USOC meeting, and Salt Lake broke, and you know, and we're saying, well, that's Salt Lake's problem. They're the organizing committee. We're the United States Olympic Committee, and the sponsor said, look, I'm paying you $40 million for those rings. Those rings are getting tarnished. It's your problem. And so I said to the president, we need to have a special investigation. And one of the guys in senior management just fought it tooth and nail. The head of international, he ultimately was indicted because he was taking money. And but there was but there were pressures that Salt Lake succumbed to that undoubtedly Atlanta had, and somehow Atlanta did not succumb to. Part of that was your dad, because he had such standing that people wouldn't play that game in Africa, and some of the developing countries were the worst about this. And I mean, I think there is no question, because I've traveled to Africa with your dad, there's no question that he delivered the Olympics to Atlanta, the needed vote. No question in my mind. And I was amazed when I traveled with him. And we went to see Nelson Mandela, and he said, Andrew, we've got to get the king's daughter in the University of Indiana. And I thought, these relationships go back, 30 years, where your dad, during apartheid, as you well know, helped children in Africa find a place to go to school here.
And he couldn't find anybody to take them. They lived at our house.
Yeah. So it's just a beautiful thing. But that's all part of this story of being really people oriented and being trusted, because you the interest, the greater good interest, is really what's driving things. And
we've talked a good bit about MARTA. Are there any other thoughts about the development of that system, the planning processes in the mid-'80s, and other efforts along the way that you'd like to comment on? Need coffee?
would you like any coffee?
I may join you.
Please do. Well, look, from the start, the MARTA rail approach was not a realistic model for success. And the planners at what they called UMTA back then, which was the federal agency that gave the money, pointed out that you have to have some high level of density for rail to work. So if you're in like the Bay Area or even like New York, and they would have advocated a much more light rail bus scenario, and frankly they were right. But we felt, quite honestly, and this is that it was important for us to be a major league player, that we have a major league system with heavy rail, and we thought we could control density by planning. So Toronto was sort of the model that we were going after, because if you go to Toronto, they've done good planning, and they'll have green belts between stations, and then they have high density at the stations. And that was our model. What we didn't take into account, or what didn't work, was the developers have such power in Atlanta that that they, when they out at Lenox, you know, we had the station where we have it on, we put the station right over there on the edge of Lenox. Well, that should have been all density, but then they pushed, they did 400, and they did these edge cities where we didn't have rail early on. So the failure of this, the self-interest of the real estate community overrode, and that. So I mean, frankly we just push it through politically. I mean, Richard Russell had a lot of power, and Herman Talmadge had a lot of power, and we used it. And you learn a lot. You know, we didn't know how the city would. You look at Miami. Miami was coming along right behind us, and I think we're a lot better off than Miami now. How it's evolved since then, it's the problem being is you can't get ridership high enough on that rail system because of this density problem we got, and the unwillingness again of government to be more like the European model, where they will set policy that forces behaviors, and our frontier ethic just won't settle for that. And this is back when, I mean, Gwinnett and Cobb didn't look like anything like they look like now, and of course they didn't join. You know, they had votes in Clayton, and they all took a pass. So it's a continuing challenge, and we made a huge investment that has played out not a good business model.
Our mayor talks about the referendum upcoming and sort of stepping back from MARTA now to take a look at the future of transit in the city. But he sees this as what, an $8 billion investment that will, in its way, dwarf the Olympic investment. And so he's trying to rally support for the referendum next year. What about this opportunity moving forward? How do you see it in relationship to your experience with MARTA?
I think the spirit of progress is still with us, but you have to, it's complex on how you can show the value proposition for that investment, and that's the trick, because there's so many moving parts. And now the Beltway looks like it's going to have great potential, but and Atlanta should do something bold, but you know, and frankly, I haven't studied this one. I live the other one. I'm not as close as on that, but we need continued boldness. I mean, Piedmont Park, you know, is blossomed out into something that was, and I guess I assume that's mainly private sector money now. Piedmont Park, I have that right?
Yeah, it's a nonprofit corporation, like the zoo.
Piedmont
Park
Conservancy.
Central Park, New York, the same way.
Yeah.
But those are great. Those are good things. It's bold things. I would love to see something bold. You know, I think it's the question is, what is the risk reward scenario there? In other words, if you spend the $8 billion, what are you gonna get? And I hope, you know, and I will try and study it, and I hope it'll be something pretty exciting. But I see a lot of pieces that I mean, look at Midtown and how where the Federal Reserve is, and on Peachtree, and look at how that's all blossomed. Now I was at Georgia Tech on Spring yesterday. Wonderful. No, but those are private developers, and more. I'd like to see more comprehensive planning, but it's gonna. And I admire one great thing about this mayor is he, like our prior mayors, you know, that you got to work with the state, and you got to convince the state. and that isn't easy in this era we're in right now. It's easier under Busby and Carter and people, and we'll see.
What do you think would have been different if, I mean, what were some of the options for MARTA other than the heavy rail? I mean, what do you think would have been different if we had gone that way? Would it have, I mean, do you think MARTA has been a bit of a magnet, at least for some density? Density we wouldn't.
We're a heck of a lot better off with MARTA than out.
Yeah.
It's just down to economics now,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I hate to see, you know, the cutbacks of service and the, you know, the fare going up, but I represent the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, audit committee, so I see the same thing, you know, with this downturn, you know, the economy. But no, it's MARTA has been a huge thing, and a huge success. I mean, I'm talking more from perfection rather than, when I say a failed business model for what its potential was. I mean, you go to San Francisco, just trying to think of the good examples, but New York, obviously, where there's just such usage.
Well, and San Francisco was built the same time.
Right, BART was right ahead of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it also has the advantage of going to, that they had the region really supported it also. I mean, if we had gone to Marietta and.
Yeah. Well, and they had, and you know, with the bay there, they had the congestion.
Yeah.
I mean, Market Street's just fantastic. You know, they got trolleys at one level, buses at one level. And
I just was there. I was on a bike trip, and we actually took bikes on BART across from Oakland, where you could afford a hotel. You know, and you go over to San Francisco, right across the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, what fun!
Ride around, then get back on.
What fun!
On BART. You know,
yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. And but it's.
But you're right. They have the built-in congestion, and of course we have the unlimited. I mean the unlimited space for expansion. That's sort of the blessing and the challenge of Metro Atlanta.
Because I mean, because when you do heavy rail, you're building it for rush hour kind of congestion,
which is plenty bad in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, look at the infill that's happened with Inland, where we finally come around, and maybe it'll come around more on the rail.
Yeah.
It's interesting you cited that the Toronto example.
Right.
That big U that they invested in has certainly triggered development. And you can see echoes of that, particularly on the North Line in Midtown.
Lindbergh, a lot of things happen.
Yeah, well, that's true. That was the old Starlight Drive-In Theater.
And the flea market.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm being impatient over these times. You know, these things are happening.
I think that does seem to be one of the other things about Atlanta is the willingness to invest for the long term. I mean, has been a characteristic, investing for the long term. Because, you know, if you tried to do MARTA now, you just couldn't do it. I mean, what would the economics be to try to do it now?
Right. No, you couldn't. Well, and you've got this, you know, Atlanta's a region, and then, you know, how do you relate the city that really drives everything to, you know, all these counties that are coming in that really are a part of our region and that yet don't feel the need to pay for everything that's in the city. And then we went through a lot of that on MARTA at the time, you know, like sales tax and use tax. And well, I'd tell you another story now that so long ago. After MARTA passed, and I told you about the judge saying, you know, do you want to recount or not? We still had the question of were lawyers going to attack it and knock it out. So we had 4 court actions filed right away. One was to recount the votes, and 3 others, and we won all those. Matter of fact, I handled all those. But we still, before we issued bonds, which was the big thing, wanted to make sure that all the bases. What you don't want is when Northwest had nuclear power, and everybody said that's the greatest thing. There was something called WPS, Washington Public Power Service, and Washington, Oregon, Idaho, one other, all signed contracts that will pay for it. And then nuclear didn't work, and then the state said, I'm not paying. And one Supreme Court said, yes, you have to, and the other three said, no, you don't have to. It was all political. So we didn't, I mean, that was after Marta, but we didn't want anything like that, which is another good thing about Atlanta. Let's find out up front. If we got something, let's take the risk. If we don't, let's just get it handed to us. So we encouraged somebody to sue us, put it that way, and took the case to the Supreme Court of Georgia and just laid out every legal issue that you could bring up. So we won, but it's easier to litigate those kind of things, which were on the merits, than if you got in some context, like they got in context in Washington with the taxpayers saying, Supreme Court, I'll lynch every one of you if you make me pay these. So Atlanta's had good, thoughtful leadership, where people are thinking ahead, and that was just one example. Your dad, when he talked about privatizing Atlanta Airport, was way ahead of, ultimately Indianapolis did it. So it's all about this bold thinking, is there a way to do it better? Is that spirit that it has had, and it's hard in a time like this. It's hard to have. Everybody's say, oh well, we can't do anything right now, but you have to.
One of the things Marcel said, that the thing that really has helped the Atlanta airport was, and I can't think of the name of the legislator who said, all the revenue from the airport have to stay in the airport. You can't use them as part of general revenue.
Right.
And that's really made it sort of self-sustaining as a.
Well, and that's no question about that, and that's the way a good bond deal, what you call a project finance deal should be. And the airports, that's another one. I'd forgotten about that aspect of it. So when the expansion came up, I represented Marriott Host, and I introduced them to Jesse and Herman and Felker Ward. Felker was my law partner. Had Felker represent them, and they bid, and they lost it to Pascal's, not to Pascal's, to who in the hell, Ram Dodd. Anyway, they lost it.
It was Dobbs Pascal, wasn't it?
Dobbs Pascal got it.
Yeah.
But and our people were saying the way Delta and Eastern were pressuring the city, the airport's never going to work, because they wanted real narrow concourse. They wanted no space for retail. They didn't want to pay for it, because everything would, so look where the airport is now. I mean, the other airports provided the model. I mean, Miami, Pittsburgh, and others. But
and Dallas, was it was it? I think it was Dallas. That sort of idea of putting it on the side, having the concourses connected.
Yeah, Dallas is sort of the anti-Atlanta.
Yeah, Dallas is not a good model.
Houston?
But it was just interesting to see that Delta and Eastern didn't care about what the city should care about in a way, and so that was a real tug of war. That reminds me of Charlie Davis. When I first started, I would go down there in Marta, and it took me about 2 times to see who ran the city. Charlie Davis would sit in the back, and everything had to be cleared with Charlie. It was fascinating. So that's where you went and you cut your deal with the city. And then Wade Mitchell was the chairman of the finance committee. And Wade was a good independent guy, but Charlie just had his way so there were some institutions around here, and Harold Sheets ran the county back then. And when you went over to the legislature, you could go on the floor in those early days. So it was just a zoo. And,
Lobbyists on the floor.
Oh, everybody's on the floor. Yeah, and then there were milk machines that the milk lobby gave them, so you go in and drink the milk. It was just such a. Well, there was a gas station right across the street from the Capitol. That was all red clay, and you could get your car filled with gas while you walked. Literally, right. You know where that plaza is right now?
Yeah.
That was a red clay with a gas station, just an open, almost field. So we've come a long way.
Sunoco.
Was it a Sunoco?
That's my recollection.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you.
Maybe wrong.
But
I remember it.
but anyway, the airport's come a long way.
Do you think Atlanta is different? I mean, it seems like in terms of using the whole bond authority strategy for financing big things. Is that? I mean, has Atlanta kind of been sort of ahead of the curve on that, or?
No, one time in my life I was a municipal bond investment banker. So, matter of fact, your father was kind enough to let me do the Atlanta Airport revenue deal. So I went all around. Atlanta has been conservative. When you look at Jefferson County, Alabama, going to bankruptcy right now, you say that's a good thing. So I think it's the business community is. I can't really figure out during the Campbell era exactly what went on there, but historically, and I shouldn't get the details of it. I think Ray McClendon sort of got a bad deal. I feel sorry for Ray. I don't think he did anything illegal or wrong. I think you see the people that all belong to the Piedmont Driving Club, and their kids go to the same schools, and therefore there's this sort of mutuality of back scratching. Ray saw that and thought, how do I emulate that? And that's my view. And it didn't quite work. And plus, people that weren't getting the business that he got tried to figure out ways to give him, do him in. So anyway, I'm sort of sorry I got into that sidebar, but it's just I was just thinking of the dynamics that you see. But Atlanta's always been conservative on the bonding, and the airport would be pretty traditional, but back when I was alluding to it, Delta and Eastern ran it. They had such power. Now Delta, I guess, has got the power. What Miami did that we don't do is there were fewer dominant Americans, pretty dominant, but they really played the airlines off against each other, and so they had more say. It was less of a slugfest. And so there would be times when Delta would say, well, maybe we'll move everything to Cincinnati if you don't really give us everything we want, like that. But I think that's worked. And then you're bonding. You do your water and sewer. Then you do your GOs, and then we've been pretty progressive about what do they call them? Tag bond, project bonds. Tax increment bonds. So, but not high risk, because you can really get in trouble if you get too. So I think there's been good business acumen, and the state's so conservative, and it's sort of way too conservative. State's way too conservative. Like that's another whole side. Where the city has been frustrated, like in venture capital, investing pension funds. Most Boston does it. California does it. You can't get now. They're about to make it happen, and.
So you can use state pension funds for venture capital? To
invest in what they call alternative investments, yeah. So we've been starved. We're a real estate town, and now we're a corporate headquartered town. But we've been starved for venture capital. Something I'm working on right now. But over the years, I mean, your dad worked real hard on that, and we were sort of stymied because of the state being so conservative. He worked real hard to get infill, to get people to move into town. And lo and behold, here it is. But these things take, so we're talking, take decades.
Well, I guess my understanding, I think in talking with, maybe it was Gene Duffy or whatever, was putting in place some of the zoning, sort of putting in place some of the, structure to allow it to happen.
He's talking about the tax increment districts. So you say, here's an area where I want to make it grow, and I think it will, so I'll issue bonds. And what I'll do is I'll pledge the growth of the property value over time to pay the bonds off. It's what we call TADs, tax increment district, and that's been done well.
And that's what Atlantic Station was done that
exactly.
way.
Yeah. So I think Atlanta's done a pretty good job. That is innovative. I mean, other, Boston's been doing that for years, but there are a lot of them that don't. I'm just trying to think. Because when I was an investment banker, I traveled all over the country. You go out to Nevada, these new growth areas, and they're so young, and so they hire people in. They don't have the bureaucracy. I was trying to think of our issues. I think we've gotten like the Atlanta school system, and and under the Campbell thing administration, where all of a sudden we got bloated and we got bureaucratic, and you have to go through the. It's like the seasons of the year, winter comes and then you need a good forest fire to get the deadwood out, and then you can start again with spring. So, and that's, and I've seen when we've seen when all of a sudden the chamber steps up and says we're going to run candidates for the school district. So we have that living drama going on, which is quite natural because when you open opportunities and say, all right, I want more employment for all people, and then people get inside. I mean, like the people from Atlanta school system that retired but then came for lunch every day, and it's paid for. Well, I've seen that other places too. It just so you have to. It's all part of the life of but that'll create a tension. Probably sure create a tension between the Atlanta Chamber and unions, but that's just something you gotta have. But what you hope is Atlanta will do is that they'll always have people in the middle that say, let's work this out. I did work for West Virginia. They had a brain drain. Their student enrollment for the state went down 50%, and their faculty administration stayed the same. And so that's what you don't want.
Well, that's not our problem at Georgia State. It's quite the students were growing and the faculties remaining the same.
32,000 this fall.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that's another whole story about Atlanta and its growth is Georgia State and what it's done for this part of town.
Yeah.
And just the. I was down speaking at the business school last week, and the international students, and ironically, I spoke at Emory this week, and the international students in these classes, and I mean, just the brains and the energy that Georgia State brings to Atlanta, or Emory, or Tech, huge, or Clark AU, I'm on the board of. So all those are really important
The phenomenal thing about Georgia State is that I think it's the only research university that actually mirrors the population of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is as diverse as the state as a whole.
It's wonderful.
And it's really, and then you still then will bump into people who come from California. I mean, people are coming from around the country and the world.
Yeah.
Michigan,
To
Virgin Islands, Nigeria.
Yeah.
We have three
graduate students
graduate students helping us.
Wonderful.
One is a young man from Michigan who just heard of the Andrew Young School and had to come and be a part of it. And a young woman from Nigeria.
That's
Same
fantastic.
deal.
She's getting her
She's
PhD.
here for a master's and a PhD. And will really go back there trained and equipped to help economic development in her homeland. And then Teresa, of course, from the Virgin Islands, wanting to go back and make a contribution in her homeland. So it's just a mini UN.
Yeah, I wish that story could get out more, because these people who want to put walls up on immigration, and I mean, I had the same experience at a lecture yesterday at Tech. This has been my year to go to school, my week to go to school, and a guy came up from Costa Rica afterwards. Sandra Mackey spoke on Islam, and she is really, I don't know if you know her or know what she does, but she writes books on Islam. She's really great. And he came up and he was engaged, but he's from Costa Rica, and he was talking about what he wants to do for Costa Rica and go back. And globalization, your dad has been a huge factor. Atlanta's plugged in on globalization. The Olympics helped a lot, and your schools help a lot. And
venture capital would close the loop.
yeah, well, that's huge, huge lacking. We are still a real estate town.
Yeah.
To too great a degree.
Well, and that's why the economy is so stagnant.
Yeah, yeah.
So you know, because at the end of the day, the other aspect of your business environment has to feed the real estate. The real estate can't be the real driver. I mean, ultimately, you've got to have people who want to come here for some other reason.
Yeah.
And then that boosts the...
Well, it's a great example where this, Atlanta's sort of tied the state because the regulatory was so poor. On all these banks have popped up that causes a huge problem. If the Georgia banking people had run to the standards they should have, then we wouldn't have had a lot of those loans. So that's another.
And that one, I was hearing somebody say one day you could be a carpenter one day and a developer the next, and go to one of these little banks and get a loan to build a subdivision.
Yeah, sadly, yeah. And well, I hope this has been helpful. It's fun to talk about all this.
Well, good. No, this has been really, it's illuminated a lot of, a lot of good things. What you said some things about, sort of how things have changed. I mean, what would be kind of your, I guess, advice to the future, or what do you think Atlanta needs to be doing to keep sort of moving forward?
Leadership, and that's sort of creating a network of leadership to try and make 1 and 1 equal 4, and because you've got all these wonderful things like the institutions that we've been talking about of higher education. I'll give you a model like the GRA is a great idea, Georgia Research Alliance, where it tries to bring people together. We need a lot more of that kind of convening where you can get a united approach, and so that there's more power behind initiatives. It's hard to get attention for Atlanta. Well, most of my time I spend professionally outside Atlanta. And that's true for a lot of people. It's certainly true for the multinational companies, Coke and everybody else. And Georgia's needs to get the attention of people to say how important this is, as your base, and then get everyone sort of the leadership convening so there's accountability. And so I guess I'm saying 2 things at once. I mean, one thing is just to get everyone talking that cares about leadership and coordinate it. A little example, my area where I spend a lot of time now is corporate governance for boards of directors. I think there's a great opportunity if Georgia State and Emory, maybe in the University of Georgia, would create a center for corporate governance for the Southeast. Emory does some stuff on corporate governance, Georgia State does some corporate governance, but it wouldn't be nearly as powerful as if they all came together, if your goal were to be the regional center. And there's just lots of things where people could help each other more. And I think it's just like, and I use GRA because I know, like Carlton Brown from Clark goes there and then he gets to interact with the head of tech, and that's a good thing because then they get to know each other, and then things happen. But it used to be easy in the old days because the Commerce Club was, the crowd, if you will, or the action forum, whatever. Now it's more complex, but it's solvable. And you've got to keep that spirit and that culture. I don't see that spirit and that culture in Cobb County so much, and so you got to obtain it, which you got to pull it together. And none of this needs to be. There's the whole political world and the Tea Party and all that, but that needs to not get in the middle of this, because this needs to be about problem solving for Atlanta, and and opportunities for Atlanta. If you get people talking about the right thing, it could make a huge difference. But there's anyway, that's what I see, and I'm guilty, and a lot of people are guilty of, well, the mayor will take care of that, or the chamber will take care of that, and well, I should care enough and get a little more involved and do whatever I can do.
So is that that people who used to be more focused on Atlanta are now more nationally and globally focused? Is that part of Atlanta's success?
Well, it's part of Atlanta's success, but still, I mean, Atlanta's so much bigger. There's still room for, even for those that are focused on Atlanta, I'm not, I don't see enough of the GRA kind of model, and I just use that as a convening kind of thing. And maybe I'm not wired enough into it, but it's a leadership. I mean, Jimmy Carter used to excite people, and your dad would excite people, and he would convene, and everybody would show. Felt like they needed to be there. It's a much more complicated, it's a more complex community, but I won't say it's more complicated, because in the end, you just need the right few people.
Yeah, one of the things I was looking at in the report that was done on my dad's 8 years is how many plans were produced. It's like, it seems like there were all these groups meeting and talking about,
Yeah,
long-term
Yeah.
strategies.
exactly.
So you don't see as much of that happening now, you think? And that, you think that's one of the things that Atlanta has done that's been useful?
Well, it was useful. I mean, back ARC, was it still called ARC, Atlanta Regional Commission? See, that was a requirement of federal law to get federal monies, in the early '70s, and Jerry Horton was in the legislature and the consultant that did a lot of work on that. But we got excited about it. We would get ahead, and we would do things like that, and then we would do. Try and do planning, and get people rallied around a vision, and what needs to happen. And I think there's a bit of a challenge of when you're this big and diffuse. If you don't set a vision, you don't set a convening, then people don't feel accountable or don't feel like that it's anything that they should care about or be involved with. So. And it's how do you communicate these days with the internet? I mean, it's a new world, and the age being so much lower. But it's that spirit of civility, convening, collegiality. You can disagree, but let's find something we can agree on and we can pursue together. And now we're multicultural. There's even more challenge there. That like, what are we doing to put a tent around, Muslims and Africans and Indians, and making everyone feel a part of the community.
These are challenges.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
well, thank you.
to sit down with us. This has been most helpful to our process. And, if you have any thoughts that occur to you that you just need to add to something that you feel like you've left out, contact either one of us. We'll be happy to.
You know so much more about the city than I do. I hope I'm somewhat accurate, because I'm coming off the top of my head going back 30 years.
Well, and that's that's sort of the different. I mean, the thing that's we're trying to do here is to really have the perspective from people who were in the room. I mean, it's one thing to look at the AJC's account of something.
Yeah.
But it's totally different to talk to people who watched Jesse Hill dress down Marvin Arrington.
Marvin,
but that's a classic. But that is but Jesse could dress down virtually anybody in this town. I mean, and like you said, he did it with such. I mean, he just had such authority, and you kind of say, how did this guy, but I think it's that he was 2 steps ahead of everybody else, and at the end of the day, you just have to know you want to be on the train he's riding.
Yeah.
Because if you go up against him, it's going to be you and what army?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One thing I left out was, which I shouldn't have, was when JFK came in, there was this, it was such an exciting time, and Jackie Kennedy was a big part of that, and as a matter of fact, I went to a showing of her trips abroad and the outfit she wore, but she just projected something of great excitement that was consistent with his vision, and Gene was the same way. Andy and Gene just projected out as a couple. When she just had her own energy and her own way, but it was a really a team, but also an inspirational kind of thing, where people just felt great about the couple. Don't tell your dad, I'm not trying to diminish him, but it was really true, and she had that energy, and she's playing tennis, he played tennis. But it's funny, people people, this is the thing about leadership, if people feel attracted to positive, smiling, enjoying life people, and then when they hear the issues from them, they're much more amenable. I'll listen and yeah, I'll consider, you know, what you all are interested in. But that was again sort of this, you know, they talked about JFK and Jackie, so this Camelot, and we had our own little Camelot, and Rosalind Carter did that too with Jimmy Carter, to a pretty good degree, because she picked her causes, and I just think that's so powerful. You know, and Michelle Obama's doing that today on obesity, and I'm on the board of Popeye's Chicken, and we're listening to her. We're paying attention, and we're trying to, which we should be. So again, it's that leadership, and it's that, and that's projecting to people an image that gets them excited. What fascinated me is when we did the torch relay, well, when ACOG did the torch relay, I've forgotten the statistic, but something like 80% of the country turned out to see the torch. It's huge, just a huge number. You say, well, why would they get up at some ungodly hour and go down there? But people want something to rally around. And so that imagery, you know, and it's real, because the people are real, but it's also that projection out is, and see, pick on Bill Campbell, he came across as arrogant and therefore not. I mean, he just had his own issues. Huge difference, though, on what it projects for rallying the community to do something. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't want to miss that point, because it's a big point. Mm-hmm. And so anyway,
I appreciate that.
Well, she was terrific. Well, this was fun. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.